Did you know that the miniature submarine used in Fantastic Voyage was so large and heavy that it had to be broken into pieces just to fit inside the studio? This was a movie where the impossible was built by hand, one wire and one painted wall at a time. It was science fiction you could almost touch. Let's dive in and discover 20 weird and amazing facts about Fantastic Voyage. Number 20. The script traveled a long road before it became a movie. The story of Fantastic Voyage did not begin the way most people think. It did not start as a book. It started as a screenplay. A writer named Otto Clement and a producer named Charles Bennett had an idea. What if a team of scientists could shrink down small enough to travel inside the human body? That idea was so exciting and so new that it caught the attention of a major Hollywood studio almost immediately. But here is the twist. The script went through many hands before anyone agreed on what it should look like. Some writers wanted it to feel like a medical drama. Others wanted it to feel like a pure adventure. There were arguments about tone, about character, and about how realistic the science should be. The studio was nervous. Shrinking people? Traveling through blood? It sounded either brilliant or absolutely ridiculous, and nobody was quite sure which one it would be. The script was rewritten multiple times. Scenes were added, then removed, then added again. Characters changed names. The mission changed shape. What began as a quiet, almost serious science story slowly became something wilder, more colorful, and more cinematic. By the time the final version landed in the hands of director Richard Fleischer, it had already lived several different lives on paper. And yet, even after all those changes, the core idea stayed exactly the same. Go small, go inside, save a life. Simple, thrilling, unforgettable. What looked like a smooth production from the outside had years of doubt hidden underneath. Number 19. Isaac Asimov's name was on the book, but not the beginning. Many people believe that the famous science fiction writer Isaac Asimov created Fantastic Voyage. His name appears on the novel, and his name carries enormous weight in the world of science fiction. But the truth is a little more complicated than that. Asimov did not write the original story. He was hired to turn the screenplay into a novel, after the movie was already being made. The studio wanted a book to go along with the film, and they wanted someone brilliant and credible to write it. Asimov was the perfect choice. He was already one of the most respected science fiction writers alive. He sat down to write the novel. He ran into a problem. The science in the screenplay simply did not make sense to him. He was a man who took science seriously. He believed in logic, in accuracy, in making sure the details added up. And some of the details in Fantastic Voyage just did not add up. He pushed back. He asked questions. He tried to fix things. But in the end, the movie had its own rules, and the novel had to follow the story, not the other way around. Asimov wrote the book beautifully, and it became a bestseller. But inside the pages, you can feel a scientist wrestling with fiction, a man who loved facts, writing a story where the facts bent to fit the adventure. He later wrote a sequel called Fantastic Voyage 2, Destination Brain, where he finally got to tell the story his way, with better science and his own rules. The book felt like a quiet revenge, elegant, intelligent, and entirely his own. Number 18. The submarine was real enough to walk inside. The miniaturized submarine in the movie was called the Proteus. On screen it looked sleek, white, and futuristic, like something from a dream. But building that submarine was a massive physical project. The production team constructed a full-scale version of the Proteus that was large enough for the entire cast to walk inside. It was built on a soundstage at 20th Century Fox Studios in California. The ship was designed by Harper Goff, the same brilliant designer who had worked on the Nautilus submarine for 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea just over a decade earlier. A gift for making impossible things look believable. The Proteus had working lights, moving panels, and interior details so precise that they looked like they belonged in a real laboratory. Actors could touch the walls, sit in the seats, and move through the corridor. This made their performances feel grounded. When Raquel Welch reached for a control panel or Stephen Boyd leaned against the hull, it was all real. There was no pretending. The weight of the set was in their hands. The production team also built a much smaller version of the submarine for the wide shots inside the body, miniature that could be filmed against painted backdrops and illuminated with carefully placed lights. The challenge was making the two versions match. Every detail on the small model had to mirror every detail on the full-size set. It took weeks of coordination between designers, painters, and camera operators. What looked seamless on screen was the result of two completely different objects pretending to be one. It looked like one perfect ship. It was actually two very different problems. Cha-cha. Number 17. The human body sets were the largest ever built at Fox. When the Proteus enters the human body, the world on screen becomes enormous. Giant red corridors pulse with life. Strange, glowing chambers stretch out in every direction. Thick, flowing walls seem to breathe. This was not computer-generated imagery. This was not a trick of the camera. Everything you see inside the human body in Fantastic Voyage was physically built on a soundstage. The production team at 20th Century Fox constructed some of the largest interior sets in the studio's entire history for this film. Chamber alone was a massive, cavernous room filled with moving mechanical parts, pulsing lights, and actors running through it in full costume. Stagehands operated the machinery from hidden positions around the room. The brain corridor was lined with translucent tubes filled with slowly moving colored liquid. It was lit from behind to create that eerie, biological glow. Designer Lyle Wheeler and his team worked for months on these environments. They studied real medical illustrations, microscopic photographs, and anatomy textbooks to make sure each set felt like a real location inside a body. They wanted viewers to believe they were truly inside something alive. The sets were so impressive that many of them were kept and reused for other productions after the film was finished. Size like that did not happen by accident. Number 16. Raquel Welch almost did not get the role. Raquel Welch was 25 years old when she appeared in Fantastic Voyage. It was one of her earliest major film roles, and it launched her career in a way that almost nothing else could have. But she almost did not get the part at all. The role of Cora Peterson, the technical assistant who accompanies the mission into the human body, was originally considered for other actresses. Debate about who should play her. The studio wanted someone with presence, with beauty, and with enough screen confidence to hold her own, alongside established actors. Welch was relatively new. She had done some television work and a few smaller film roles, but she had not yet proven herself on a large Hollywood production. She had to fight for the opportunity. She prepared carefully, studied the script, and arrived to her meetings with a focused energy that impressed the people making decisions. She was finally cast. She threw herself into the physical demands of the role without hesitation. She wore the tight white wetsuit costume for long hours under hot studio lights. She performed action sequences that required climbing, swimming in tanks, and moving through elaborate sets with technical precision. There were moments during filming where she was physically uncomfortable or genuinely frightened by the environment. But she did not stop. She pushed through every scene with quiet determination. Her performance was controlled and compelling, and she brought a warmth to Cora that made the character feel real rather than decorative. The movie helped make her a star, but the role that made her famous was nearly given to someone else entirely. One decision changed the direction of her whole life. Number 15. The antibody attack scene terrified the cast. One of the most memorable sequences in Fantastic Voyage is the moment when the crew of the Proteus is attacked by antibodies, the body's natural defense system. The antibodies look like massive, translucent creatures that latch onto the divers and try to pull them away. The scene is visually stunning. Also one of the most physically demanding sequences in the entire film. The actors who filmed this scene were submerged in a large water tank on the soundstage. The tank had been specially prepared with lighting rigs, underwater cameras, and support equipment operated by a team of technicians. The antibody creatures were elaborate props made from flexible materials and operated by underwater stunt performers. When the creatures attacked the actors in the scene, the contact was real. The props were heavy, the tank was cold, and the lighting conditions made it difficult to see clearly underwater. Raquel Welch was the most visible victim in this sequence, and she later described the experience as genuinely frightening. The antibody props would latch onto her costume and pull, and because the material was designed to look realistic and organic, it felt nothing like a standard film prop. It felt alive. Number 14. The film won 2 Academy Awards. Fantastic Voyage was not just a box office success, it was also recognized as a technical and artistic achievement by the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences. The film won 2 Academy Awards at the 39th Academy Awards ceremony in 1967. First Oscar went to Walter M. Scott and Stuart A. Rice for Best Art Direction in a Color Film. The second went to Emil Cosa Jr. for Best Special Visual Effects. These were not minor categories. In the 1960s, the special effects and art direction categories were among the most competitive because studios were pushing the boundaries of what could be physically created on a soundstage. To win in those categories, a film had to do something that truly had not been done before. And Fantastic Voyage had. The interiors of the human body, the glowing chambers, the pulsing corridors, the enormous biological landscapes, represented a completely new visual language. Nobody had tried to depict the inside of a living human being on that scale before. The production designers had to invent everything from scratch. There were no reference points in cinema. They looked at science, at nature, at art, and at their own imagination. The results were extraordinary enough to be recognized by the entire industry. The film was also nominated for Best Cinematography and Best Film Editing, which shows just how broadly its technical achievements were respected. Small golden statues for a film about tiny people inside a giant body. Sometimes, the smallest stories win the biggest prizes. Number 13. Director Richard Fleischer had personal reasons for loving this story. Richard Fleischer was a thoughtful and technically skilled director. He had already made films like 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea and Compulsion before he took on Fantastic Voyage. Connection to this particular story went a little deeper than a typical studio assignment. Fleischer had always been fascinated by the relationship between science and imagination. He believed that science fiction, when done carefully, could teach people something real about the world. Fantastic Voyage gave him the opportunity to bring genuine medical and biological knowledge into a commercial adventure film in a way that had never been attempted. He worked closely with scientific consultants throughout the production. He wanted every environment inside the body to reflect real anatomy, even when it was exaggerated for dramatic purposes. He wanted children who watched the film to walk out of the theater knowing more about how the human body worked than when they walked in. Fleischer pushed his production designers to study medical illustrations obsessively. He pushed his writers to ground the dialogue in real scientific language. He pushed his actors to treat the mission seriously, not as a fantasy, but as a genuine emergency. His approach gave the film a weight and a seriousness that many science fiction movies of the era lacked. It was not just adventure, it was education dressed in excitement. Fleischer later said that making this film had taught him more about the human body than anything else in his life. A director who set out to educate his audience ended up educating himself along the way. Number 12. The film inspired real scientists and doctors. Fantastic Voyage did something very rare for a Hollywood film. It inspired people to pursue real careers in science and medicine. Over the years, numerous researchers, surgeons, and engineers have spoken about watching the film as children and feeling something shift inside them. The idea of navigating the human body, of understanding it from the inside out, of using miniature technology to reach places that were previously impossible. These were not just movie fantasies to certain young viewers. They were challenges. They were invitations. The film appeared at a moment when medical technology was advancing rapidly. The 1960s were a decade of extraordinary scientific ambition. The space race was happening. Heart transplants were becoming possible. The idea that miniature machines might someday travel through the bloodstream did not seem entirely absurd. Today, the field of nanotechnology is actively developing microscopic medical devices that can be introduced into the human body for diagnostic and therapeutic purposes. Parallels with Fantastic Voyage are not accidental. Many of the scientists working in this field have mentioned the film as an early inspiration. What was once a cinematic fantasy has become a serious scientific pursuit. The movie drew a picture of a possible future and sent it into the imaginations of a generation. Some of those imaginations grew up and started building. A story told in a darkened theater in 1966 planted seeds that are still growing today. Sometimes, fiction does not just reflect the future, it creates it. Number 11. Stephen Boyd was exhausted by the physical demands of the shoot. Boyd was a serious and accomplished actor who had appeared in Ben-Hur and other major productions before Fantastic Voyage. He was known for his physicality, his intensity, and his ability to bring emotional weight to complex roles. Fantastic Voyage tested him in ways he had not fully anticipated. Production was physically relentless. The sets were enormous, the filming schedule was demanding, and many of the action sequences required the cast to perform in conditions that were genuinely uncomfortable. Spent significant time in the water tank, in moving sets, and on elaborate constructions that required physical agility and stamina. He also had to maintain a sense of calm and authority throughout because his character, Grant, was the audience's guide through the entire mission. He was in nearly every scene. The camera returned to his face again and again to gauge the danger, the uncertainty, the decision-making. Boyd approached the role with complete professionalism, but in interviews after the production, he spoke about the exhaustion that had accumulated over weeks of filming in unusual conditions. He mentioned the heat of the studio lights, the disorientation of the moving sets, and the particular challenge of making urgent, high-stakes performance choices while physically uncomfortable. His efforts paid off. Grant is a compelling and believable presence, steady without being stiff, brave without being reckless. Boyd gave the character something quiet and real. The effort behind that quietness was anything but small. Number 10. The film was made during a scientific golden age. 1966 was a remarkable moment in human history. The world was changing faster than it ever had. NASA was preparing to put a man on the moon. Computers were beginning to change how science was done. Medical technology was transforming what it meant to treat illness. In this climate, Fantastic Voyage was not just entertainment, it was a mirror. It reflected the excitement and the ambition of an era that genuinely believed science could solve anything. The film arrived at a moment when audiences were ready to believe in the impossible. They had watched rockets launch on their television screens. They had read about heart surgery becoming routine. The idea that tiny submarines might one day travel through the bloodstream felt less like madness and more like the next logical step. The studio understood this. The marketing for the film leaned heavily into real scientific language. The trailers and posters presented the story not as pure fantasy, but as a glimpse of tomorrow. This approach worked beautifully. Audiences came in curious and left amazed. The film tapped into something deep, the human desire to explore, to understand, to push past every boundary and see what lay beyond. A decade defined by the space race, Fantastic Voyage turned the lens inward. The final frontier was not outer space, it was the human body. And in 1966, that idea felt just as thrilling and just as possible as reaching the stars. Number 9. The costumes were designed to glow under ultraviolet light. The white costumes worn by the crew of the Proteus throughout the film were not simple wardrobe choices. They were carefully engineered tools of visual storytelling. The costume designer for the film worked closely with the cinematography and lighting teams to develop suits that would respond to the unusual lighting conditions inside the body sets. Many of the interior sets were lit using specialized light sources, including ultraviolet light, to create that otherworldly biological glow that defines the visual style of the film. The costumes were treated with materials that would react to this lighting, making the crew members appear to pulse and shimmer in the same way that the surrounding organic walls did. This created a visual unity between the characters and their environment. They were not visitors in a foreign place. They were part of it. The effect was subtle but powerful. Viewers felt it without consciously noticing it. The crew of the Proteus seemed to belong inside the body, which made the audience feel safer traveling alongside them. The treatment of the costumes also created challenges. Materials used were not always comfortable to wear for long periods. Under the heat of the studio lights, the suits became warm and restrictive. The actors wore them for hours at a time, day after day. But the visual effect on screen was worth every moment of discomfort. Luminous and effortless on film had been carefully calculated down to the molecular level of the fabric. Fashion and science stitched together. Number 8. A legendary animator contributed to the visual effects. The special effects team behind Fantastic Voyage included some of the most skilled technical artists working in Hollywood at the time. One name stands out in a particularly interesting way. Art Cruikshank was the head of the Special Photographic Effects Department at 20th Century Fox, and he oversaw the creation of many of the film's most stunning visual sequences. But beyond the in-house team, the production drew on a wide network of artists and technicians who specialized in different aspects of visual illusion. Blood cell sequences, in which tiny round objects drift peacefully past the submarine like enormous balloons, required the creation of hundreds of individual physical elements that could be filmed and composited together. Each blood cell was a physical object, crafted, painted, and carefully placed in relationship to the submarine models. The process of filming them and combining them with the submarine footage was painstaking work that took weeks to complete. The team experimented with different sizes, textures, and movements before settling on the final look. They wanted the blood cells to feel gentle and organic, not threatening. A reminder that the body was not an enemy, but a living landscape. The quiet drift of those enormous red spheres became one of the most iconic images in the entire film. It was calming and extraordinary at the same time. What looked like a river of life took months to build, one hand-painted sphere at a time. Number 7. The film had a military subplot. That was very much of its time. Fantastic Voyage is, on the surface, a medical adventure. Woven into its plot is a Cold War thriller. The patient being treated, a scientist named Jan Banis, is a defector who carries valuable knowledge that both sides of the Cold War want to control. The mission to save his life is as much about political power as it is about medicine. The layer of the story was entirely deliberate. The screenwriters and producers understood that 1966 audiences lived in a world shaped by the tension between the United States and the Soviet Union. The Cold War was not background noise, it was the defining reality of daily life for millions of people. A spy story into a science fiction film was a way of making the adventure feel urgent and relevant. There is a saboteur on board the Proteus. Someone on the team is working against the mission. This element of mistrust and suspicion running through a story about the interior of the human body was a powerful metaphor, even if most viewers in 1966 experienced it purely as plot. The body has its own defense systems. So does a nation. The enemy can come from outside or from within. The film asks its audience to trust, to cooperate, and to fight for survival in a world where the threat is not always visible. It was science fiction with a Cold War heartbeat. What looked like a medical adventure was also a political one. 6. The film was adapted into a successful animated television series. The success of Fantastic Voyage in theaters led to an unexpected second life for the story in a very different medium. In 1968, just 2 years after the film's release, an animated television series based on the movie began airing in the United States. The series was produced by Filmation, a studio known for its work on superhero and adventure animation. Animated Fantastic Voyage kept the core concept of the film, a team of scientists who could shrink and travel inside the human body, expanded the storytelling in ways that a single film could not. New characters were introduced, new missions were created, the team traveled inside different patients, faced different threats, and explored different parts of the body each week. The animation was colorful, energetic, and aimed squarely at young audiences. Children who might have been too young to see the original film in theaters could now experience the wonder of inner body exploration on their Saturday morning television screen. The series ran for 17 episodes before ending, but its influence was significant. It introduced the concept of Fantastic Voyage to a whole new generation. It also demonstrated that the story had legs beyond a single film, that the world inside the human body was rich enough to support ongoing adventure. The seed planted by the movie grew into something that reached children in their living rooms every Saturday morning. Small people, big adventures, and a body big enough to hold every story they needed. Number 5. The film's logic has one famous scientific problem. Fantastic Voyage is celebrated for its scientific ambition, and the production team worked genuinely hard to make the story feel grounded in real biology. But there is one problem with the film's central premise that has been pointed out by scientists, educators, and curious viewers for decades. The problem is this: at the end of the film, the miniaturized submarine and its crew escape the body and return to their normal size. But throughout the mission, the submarine fires weapons, the crew members move through the body, and various materials from the miniaturized world interact with the biological environment. When everything returns to normal size, those interactions become problematic. If the materials left behind inside the body were miniaturized, they would eventually grow back to their original size, which would cause catastrophic damage to the patient from the inside. The film acknowledges none of this. It simply ends with the mission successful and the patient saved. Isaac Asimov noticed this problem when he was writing the novelization and tried to find a logical solution. He was not entirely satisfied with the explanations available to him. He later said that this inconsistency was one of the things that bothered him most about the original screenplay. The film's writers chose adventure over precision. They trusted that the momentum of the story would carry audiences past the logical gap, and for most viewers, it did. But for the scientists in the audience, that gap has never quite closed. What looked like a perfect rescue had a hole in its logic big enough to sink a submarine. Number 4. Raquel Welch became an international icon, partly because of this film. The cultural impact of Raquel Welch's appearance in Fantastic Voyage cannot be overstated. The image of her in the white wetsuit, surrounded by the eerie glow of the body's interior, became one of the defining visual images of the 1960s. It appeared on posters, in magazines, and on the walls of homes and dormitories around the world. It crossed borders and languages. It was reproduced and referenced and remembered for decades. But what many people miss when they look at that image is the context that created it. Welch was not simply posing for a photograph. She was an actress in the middle of a physically demanding film production, performing in uncomfortable conditions, carrying a role that required her to convey intelligence and courage alongside her physical presence. The image that became iconic was the result of real work. The wetsuit was not glamorous to wear. The set was not comfortable to film on. The conditions required endurance and professionalism. Welch brought both. She also brought something less easy to define, a quality of presence that the camera loved and that audiences immediately recognized. She had a way of inhabiting a space completely. In a film full of extraordinary visuals, she was the visual that people remembered most. Her career after Fantastic Voyage became extraordinary. She went on to make dozens of films and became one of the most recognized faces of her generation. The beginning of that journey was inside a giant studio body, wearing a glowing white suit, fighting off oversized antibodies. What started as a job became a legacy. Number 3. The film's influence on science fiction cinema was enormous. It is difficult to watch Fantastic Voyage today without feeling how many other films it helped create. Its influence on science fiction cinema is wide, deep, and continuing. The idea of miniaturization, of sending humans into impossible spaces, into bodies, into machines, into worlds too small for ordinary eyes, appears again and again in the films and television shows that followed it. The comedy film Inner Space from 1987 is essentially a loving tribute to Fantastic Voyage, taking the same basic premise and wrapping it in humor and action. The animated film Osmosis Jones from 2001 plays with the same interior of the body concept in a completely different register. Numerous science fiction novels, comics, and television episodes have drawn from the well that Fantastic Voyage dug in 1966. The film created a visual vocabulary for depicting the interior of the human body that artists and filmmakers have been borrowing from ever since. The glowing corridors, the drifting blood cells, the pulsing chambers. These images planted themselves in the collective imagination of a generation of storytellers. Beyond its direct influence on other films, Fantastic Voyage helped establish the idea that science fiction could be visually spectacular in ways that had nothing to do with outer space. It proved that the most extraordinary journey did not require a rocket ship. It required only a willingness to look inward. That idea changed what science fiction was allowed. Number 2, the film's legacy is tied to a single, beautiful idea. At the heart of Fantastic Voyage is an idea so simple and so profound that it has never stopped resonating. The idea is this: the human body is as vast and as mysterious as the universe itself. The inner world is just as worthy of exploration as the outer one. In 1966, when humanity was racing toward the moon, this film asked its audience to stop and look down at their own hands, their own hearts, their own blood moving quietly through invisible corridors. It asked them to consider that the miracle was not only out there in the stars, it was in here, in the chest, in the veins, in the billions of tiny systems working perfectly and constantly to keep a single human life alive. This idea connected with people in a way that pure spectacle alone never could. The adventure was thrilling, but the meaning underneath the adventure was something else entirely. It was a love letter to life itself, to the extraordinary complexity of existence, to the fact that every human being is a universe in miniature. The film reminded its audiences that they were not small. They were enormous. Every heartbeat was a story. Every cell was a miracle. The doctors and scientists in the film were not just saving one man's life. They were bearing witness to the wonder of being alive. In a decade defined by ambition and fear and the race to conquer new frontiers, Fantastic Voyage turned to its audience and said quietly, "Look at what you already are." This was not just science fiction. This was a gift. Number 1, the film almost had a completely different ending. The ending that most people know from Fantastic Voyage, in which the crew escapes through the eye of the patient just in time, surfacing to safety as the white blood cells close in, is dramatic, satisfying, and perfectly paced. It feels inevitable in the way that great endings do, but the film almost ended in a completely different way. During the development of the screenplay, multiple alternative endings were written and considered. In one early version, not all of the crew members survived the mission. The story was darker. The cost of the mission was higher. In another version, the escape from the body was more extended and more complicated, involving a different exit point and a different sequence of events. The producers debated these options seriously. They understood that the ending of a film shapes everything the audience carries out of the theater with them. A darker ending would have said one thing about sacrifice and the price of courage. A lighter, more triumphant ending would say something different, something about teamwork, about the possibility of success, about the idea that even the most impossible mission can end with everyone alive and the patient saved. They chose triumph. They chose to send their audience home with hope rather than grief. In doing so, they created an ending that has stayed with viewers for 60 years. The final image of the crew emerging from the body into the light is simple and beautiful and deeply satisfying. It was not the only possible ending, but it was, perhaps, the right one. Some choices feel like accidents. This one felt like wisdom. Bonus fact: the lost sequence that was never finished. There is one moment in the production of Fantastic Voyage that very few fans know about. A sequence that was planned, partially constructed, and ultimately left unfinished, never making it into the final cut of the film. The sequence was meant to show the Proteus passing through the lymphatic system, the body's secondary circulatory network, in a moment of detour forced by the saboteurs' interference with the mission. The production team had begun designing the sets for this sequence. Sketches existed. Materials had been gathered. The intention was to show a part of the body that had not yet appeared on screen, to give the audience a new biological landscape to marvel at and to add another layer of tension to the mission's timeline. But as the production schedule tightened and the budget came under pressure, difficult decisions had to be made. The lymphatic sequence was cut before filming could begin. The set designs were archived. The sketches disappeared into the studio's files. The sequence has never been publicly released or fully documented. It exists only in the memories of the crew members who were involved in its early planning and in references scattered through production documents that have occasionally surfaced over the years. What might have been a stunning addition to the film's visual journey through the body was sacrificed to the practical demands of time and money. But the fact that it was planned at all is a testament to the ambition of the people making this film. They wanted to show everything. They wanted to leave no part of the body unexplored. The body they imagined was bigger than the film could hold. Sometimes the most interesting stories are the ones that never made it to the screen. And sometimes the things left behind in the cutting room are the ones that remind us most clearly of the dream that drove the whole extraordinary journey. Ideas waiting to be found. Fantastic Voyage is more than a science fiction movie from 1966. It is a reminder that wonder does not require a telescope. Sometimes all you need is the willingness to look closer. Closer than your skin. Closer than your heartbeat. Into the quiet, extraordinary universe that each of us carries inside. This was a film made by people who believed in the power of imagination, designers who built worlds from scratch, actors who gave everything in uncomfortable conditions, writers who wrestled with impossible ideas and came out on the other side with something beautiful. It was not easy. It was never easy. It was worth every single moment. The story they told changed how people thought about the human body. It inspired scientists, enchanted children, and reminded a generation that the most astonishing frontier was not the one above their heads. It was the one inside their own chests. Every film hides a truth, and the truth inside Fantastic Voyage is this: you are more remarkable than you know. Look inward, and you will find a universe. If you enjoyed these stories, subscribe for more. Every movie hides a truth, and we'll keep uncovering them, one story at a time.